So on New Year's Eve, I was making vision boards with my family and some friends. And if you don't know what a vision board is, it's basically when you collect some images or words that represent what you want your next year or your life to look like. And people usually put things like goals, feelings they want more of, or the kind of life that they want their life to be next year. And while we were doing this, something really interesting stood out to me, because every single person's vision board looked different. So not just from each other's, but also from what they would have made a few years ago. And that included my family members who are in their 40s or 50s. They were still changing things, still wanting something new, still letting go of some things and holding on to others. And it got me thinking about identity, because we often talk about identity as something you figure out, especially in your 20s. Like, once you know who you are, that's it. But clearly we keep reshaping parts of ourselves all the time. So I started wondering, what does psychology actually say about identity? Is it something we're born with, or is it something that we build once and keep forever, or is it something that keeps evolving throughout our lives? And that's what I want to explore in today's episode. So what identity really is, its dimensions, is it possible not to have an identity, also about social media and identity in the workplace. First off, what is identity? When we talk about identity, we can either see it as a personal or a social one. Personal identity can be described as our sense of self. So it's the answer to the question, who am I? Who do I want to become? How do I fit into the society at this moment? And identity has three core components at the personal level. It's distinctiveness, so you have a sense of being unique and distinct from others. So I am me, and I'm not someone else. Continuity, which is having a sense of being the same person over time. So I am still me, the same person. I still change, but I am still me. After years, after weeks, this is still me in this body. And coherence, so that's having a sense of and coherence, which is having a sense of being the same person across life domains. And identity is a lifelong process, which means we constantly work on it throughout our whole life. So contexts in our life change and we need to adapt to it. Identity is a lifelong process, which means we constantly work on it throughout our whole life. Contexts in our life change and we need to adapt to it. We need to adapt our identity to it. But this development of our identity is especially important in our teenage years and young adulthood, so until about age of 30, because of the many transitions that take place, like physical, cognitive development, our interpersonal relationships changing, more expectations from the society to become independent. Identity often gets confused with personality too, but there's a key distinction here, because identity often gets confused with personality, but there's a key distinction here, because personality is this broad concept of how you think, feel, and behave. So what you are generally like, Whereas identity really takes the self approach of who do I think I am in different contexts. Now, I wanted to address the question of whether it is possible that someone does not have an identity. And interestingly, that is possible. Research shows that there are 3 dimensions of identity. The first one is consolidated identity, which is adaptive, and people feel continuously integrated with the self and they are confident about who they are. The second dimension is called the disturbed identity. So it's also possible to experience this maladaptive identity, which is called disturbed. And here people experience uncertainty about who they are. They are not able to tell, to answer this question, who am I? And it's also possible not to have any identity at all, or so to speak, because it's possible to have a lack of identity, and then person feels emptiness, they feel broken, or like they do not have a self. Based on these dimensions, psychology identifies 4 ways in which we can develop our identity, especially in teenagers. And that can be either adaptive identity, where we have a clear sense of who we are. And based on these dimensions, psychology identifies 4 ways in which we can develop our identity. So the first one is that we can either have an adaptive identity, where we have a clear sense of who we are. We feel stable about our identity. We have explored options to choose who we want to be. And we have made some decisions and we have committed to these decisions. So for example, we spent a few years trying different majors at uni, let's say law, biology, and by senior year, we discover we don't really like it. That is real. And that is still adaptive progress. So, if you don't know, if you have tried something, you have explored it, and you feel like it's not for me, or it's not for you, then it's still adaptive. And according to psychology, this process matters a lot. And key here is that you feel that you make it yourself. So you make this decision. And this is what psychology calls agency. And this is what psychology calls agency. Jesus. And this is what psychology calls agency. Now, the second one is diffused identity. And this happens when a person often feels confused about who they are and have this ongoing feeling of emptiness. For example, they keep asking themselves the same questions about their future without ever reaching a conclusion, just ruminating. And that can result in this issue with healthy identity. But it's also possible, and that's the third and the fourth way of approaching this, that our sense of self, so our identity, gets better or gets worse, so to say, over time. So first, we are unsure about who we are, and then with time, we develop a clearer sense of ourselves naturally, so-called regressive and progressive identity. So for example, a person can progress from going from a state of searching for their dream career for a long time, but then they finally find their career path, and that increases their adaptive identity again. Okay, I think it's quite interesting because you can think of, which path did I have in my teenage years or in my 20s? because it usually happens in the teenage years, and up to 20 years old. So yeah, you can just so I think it's quite interesting to think about it, because it's okay, doesn't matter. In relation to personal identity, there's also a clinical condition known as dissociative identity disorder, which is also called multiple personality disorder. It's actually noted again. In relation to personal identity, there's also a clinical condition, which is known as dissociative identity disorder, also called multiple personality disorder. It's actually notably portrayed in one of the classic Hollywood movies. Maybe you know which one I mean. I won't say because I don't want to make any spoilers here, but basically people with dissociative identity disorder think they have two or more different identities. So essentially they believe they are two different people. So for example, a person can believe they are Luyckx and that they are Martin at the same time. And they function as Luyckx for some time, and then they suddenly switch to Martin. And after they switch to Martin, they experience amnesia, so they don't remember anything that they did while being Luyckx, if that makes sense. It's generally rare though, because it's only 1% of population, but I find it quite interesting. It usually happens to people after they have some severe trauma in childhood. It's like the way for their body to react by creating this disorder, so that they cope with the reality of having some traumatic experience. Okay, so apart from our personal identity, we also have multiple social identities. And social identity is our perceived sense of self in relation to the society. So who do we think we are in the society? And in turn, what behaviors or beliefs we attribute, which are typical of these groups. So yeah, who we are in the society, and within the groups that we are, we attribute the same behaviors and beliefs that people in our group have. Let me clarify. So for example, somebody can answer this question, who am I with? I'm a student, or I'm Portuguese, or I'm Caucasian, or I'm in my 20s. And these are all social identities making this person part of a specific group, whether it's a nationality, whether it's an age group. These are all social groups. And this is strongly connected to one of the most famous theories in psychology, which is called social identity theory. According to this theory, we often think of ourselves as part of some group, like nationality, rather than as unique individuals. So we first categorize ourselves and others based on their group to better understand them. We use social categories like their ethnicity, race, religious affiliation, job position. And by the way, this is not the same as discrimination. It's just we categorize them into these groups. And then we adopt the identity of our group, and we share common values and behaviors. For example, if you are a nurse, you categorize yourself as a nurse and start adopting certain norms as you believe other nurses do. So maybe you value discipline, you want to be calm under pressure. Because this is what nurses, so this group of people, do, which you identify yourself with. And this often is biased in favor of your own group. And it leads to favoring your group over the out groups. So it's us versus them. So you maybe not necessarily have negative feelings for people outside of your group. They can be neutral feelings, but based on this theory, you definitely favor people in your group, which makes sense. So what does this teach us? This shows that a significant part of our identity and self-esteem comes from the groups we belong to, rather than some random groups. So if you think about it, what groups do you fear rejection from? Or which groups do you seek acceptance in? And why? I think this is one of the big questions that lets you pause and think about which group do you think you are part of? Now, let's turn into social media for a moment. On socials, we can observe something called the curated self. This self is basically a deliberate collection of the parts of your identity you want to show. So, for some reason, you show this content and not something else. It can be for motivating, to motivate others, and to motivate yourself, share knowledge with others. And social media carry the risk of social comparison a lot. And then looking at yourself in a negative way, right? Like, oh my God, I'm boring, or everyone is traveling. So we usually only see the picture and not the effort or story behind it. It's expression, but also a form of editing your life and just showing what you think is worth showing. And it's not necessarily bad or fake, but it's edited reality that is usually there not only so that we keep in touch with people living in Ocean Way, but to help us feel satisfied with our lives. Usually this curated satisfaction depends on the algorithm though. Okay. And usually this curated satisfaction depends on the algorithm. So the question is, if everyone you follow suddenly deleted their accounts, would you still want the same things you want right now? And it's not just social media. For a lot of us, our job title quietly becomes our whole identity. Come to think of it, when people ask you, what do? You usually answer, I am a student, a doctor, a manager, bus driver, more than I study, or I don't know, I treat illnesses and injuries. So it's easy to internalize, I am my role. If you say I am, well, you kind of say that you are your role. And I think in the professional world nowadays, it's quite common because people need even faster results. So results. They rarely have the mental capacity left to show that they care about an employee's mental health, to ask why she really didn't come to work today. They care more about when she comes back. And personally, I used to struggle with this belief that I am productivity a lot in my previous internship experience. Okay, so if you feel the same, what can you actually do? Well, firstly, observe how you feel when you need to take some time. from work, or if something does not go well? Do you then feel worthless, or do you feel some negative feelings? This helps you see that this is a pattern and not the truth, because you don't feel worthless when you progress with your tasks, probably. So it's not truth always. And then imagine you're not allowed to mention your job, your degree, any achievement, and how would you then describe who you are? So all of the roles that you have, like you're someone's friend, you're someone's sibling, you're a partner maybe. You can also use some personal qualities to describe yourself, like you're patient, you're kind, helpful, loyal, everything that you think makes you who you are. Because there's so much to write, and this shows that we are not only our work. And I think this is like a good way to illustrate that. And to restore the work-life balance, you don't need to start big. You can start to sort of rewire yourself by doing more things for pleasure, like 30 minutes a day, like trying out new food or reading a fun book. But obviously, if the thought of being less productive makes you panic or you experience burnout constantly, this might be something to take a closer look at, maybe with a therapist. Usually productivity becomes our identity because we feel that it keeps us safe. So, taking all of this info about our personal social identity, how do we actually get to know ourselves? How do we know how to answer the question, who am I? I would say your energy is your data. So, well, psychologists can tell us different theories, but we are the ones that know, and we are in charge of creating our own identity. So, see what lights you up and what feels like it's not for you. This is telling you something about who you are. You can ask yourself questions like, what are you doing when you lose track of time in a good way? After which activities do you feel more like yourself, calm, with more energy? And another thing is to separate shoulds from wants, because we are often confused about who we are because living inside other people's shoulds. Wait, what? What I want to say? Another thing is to separate shoulds from wants. We are often confused about who we are because we are often told what we should do and who we should be, especially when we are younger, like in our teenagers or in our 20s, maybe 30s too. So there are these, oh, you should do this, right? I should want this career. I should be at this stage of my life because the society tells me that. I should pose this kind of life. Or I should, I don't know, do something which is or I should so it's about really seeing which choices are based on what you want yourself and which choices are entirely based on other people's expectations from you. Alrighty. Okay, guys, so that will be all for today. Thank you so much for listening. This episode is kind of like, okay. Okay, that will be all for today. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed it. And wait, okay, I don't know what to say. Okay, so that would be all for today, guys. I hope you enjoyed this episode about identity, and I'm really curious about your thoughts on this topic. If you want, you can share them with me in the comments. I'm always happy to hear what resonates with you. I wish you a wonderful day.